Hey everyone, welcome to Canon and Plot Holes. Today we're going to talk about what warp is in the Star Trek universe. Long story short, it's the primary method that space vessels use to travel between stars at a speed that doesn't require lifetimes to accomplish. Warp travel was developed by Zefram Cochrane in the year 2063. He was mentioned a few times in the different Star Trek series until Star Trek First Contact came out in theaters, where he was introduced as an actual character. For us to get an idea of how fast warp travel is, let's think of a commuter plane as the fastest average travel speed available today, at about 970 kilometers per hour. Even with rounding up to 1,000 kilometers per hour, a trip from Earth to Pluto would take roughly 14.5 years. Using Warp 9, however, which is about 250 million kilometers per second, that trip would take roughly 30 seconds. That being insanely fast, warp still has its issues. The primary of which is antimatter. If any amount of antimatter were to come into contact with normal matter, the explosion would be more than enough to instantly vaporize any vessel carrying it. There are many scenes in all of the Star Trek series that tease an antimatter containment failure. This was always viewed as disastrous by the crew, usually involving a warp core ejection. To achieve warp, antimatter is combined with deuterium while using dilithium crystals as a matrix to create a stable antimatter reaction. This reaction creates warp plasma, which is then redirected throughout the ship to provide power for the main systems and to energize warp coils. Ever hear them talk about EPS relays? The warp coils can then generate a warp field or bubble. This bubble warps space-time around the vessel so that the vessel can travel faster than the speed of light, without getting affected by Einstein's theory of special relativity, thus keeping the items inside the bubble from being affected by the time dilation that comes with faster than light travel. Another major issue is one illustrated in the episode Where No One Has Gone Before, when a being works with Wesley Crusher to take the Enterprise to the outer rim of the universe, seemingly stranding them millions of light years from home. How warp is achieved is never directly discussed in the series themselves, but according to the Star Trek The Next Generation technical manual, the subspace continuum distortion-based propulsive effect of a warp field is created by nestling several layers of warp field energy together, with each new layer exerting force against the outermost neighbor. The cumulative effect of this force results in the massive subspace field distortion that allows the ship to reach faster than light speeds. The shape of the warp field produces the propulsive effect. The forward lobe of the field is created with a frequency offset to create the field shape asymmetry required to drive the ship forward. Now, that's a bit of mumbo-jumbo, really, but it at least gives some sort of reasoning on how it works and maybe some reasoning behind my next fact. One of the biggest reasons for warp travel being problematic is explained in the episode of The Next Generation: Force of Nature. It turns out that warp travel causes damage to the fabric of spacetime, making subspace unstable, extruding it into normal spacetime, and creating subspace rifts which are extremely dangerous to anything that come near it. The Federation Council almost immediately instituted warp speed limits on all ships traveling within Federation space. This was almost always ignored in all of the series after this episode, chronologically. With all those issues aside, warp is still considered much safer than other forms of faster-than-light travel in the Star Trek universe, such as transwarp, which is used mostly by the Borg to travel vast distances in extremely short periods of time. This method of travel was also tested by Voyager to get home quicker, but ultimately failed. There are a few other instances of this travel method in the Star Trek universe, but nothing really of note. Then we have quantum slipstream, which is an extremely dangerous method of travel. It was used to try and lure the crew of Voyager into the clutches of the Borg in the episode Hope and Fear. The crew was also killed by it in an alternate timeline in the episode Timeless. And last but not least, folding space, which is essentially a wormhole. Seen in the Star Trek The Next Generation episode Contagion, the crew of the Enterprise D discovers the homeworld of the Iconians, a race of ancient aliens that could create wormholes direct to other planets. They were also used heavily in Deep Space Nine as an actual usable wormhole near the planet of Bajor. Then there was this episode of Voyager called Pathfinder, where the crew of Voyager became able to communicate back home with Earth through an artificial wormhole that Commander Reginald Barclay was able to create near Earth using the Pathfinder array. And unfortunately, that's it. That's all I could find on Warp Drive without getting too deep in the weeds. Please like, subscribe, and get the bell on so you can see my new videos as soon as they come out.